Okay, so let's go through some broker moment things with you really fast. The 1st of September, you're going to start seeing some changes on the MLS. I've told you all the time, put everything in off-market status until such time as you are ready to have your listing go live on the MLS. Off-market, a lot of people didn't understand what that means. They would go in, they'd be trying to solicit your client. So what we're doing is we're changing it now to active no-show. And what the ANS means, it'll say active no-show or ANS on the MLS when you look up the status. It means that the listing is active, but it's not available for showing. So that's going to be coming up. But I wanted to make you aware of that. Don't freak out. If you have something in off-market status now, when you wake up September 1st, it's going to say poof, active no-show. It's just, there's changing the name of a field. Yes, sir. Mike. It does not. So just like off-market status, active no-show, if you, let's say you have clients, they want to paint their house, you're taking the listing today, they want to paint their house for 2 weeks, but you have 4 days to get it on the MLS. Once you put a sign in the yard or once you start to market the house, you can market it even though it's active no-show. It just means you can't take showing requests for that house because of that. So that's a great question. But the days on market do not start until you actually change it to active status on there. Talking about that, let's talk about days on market. Is it confusing when you look at days on market, cumulative days on market, and you go, what does it all mean? We decided as a board of directors that we're changing that to strictly days on market, which is in today's world, cumulative days on market. So we've tried to simplify it. I have several slides to look at. We're going to combine them all to a simplified days on market status. So currently, days on market ties to the MLS. The days on market will grow when they're in active or backup status. They're paused or frozen if they're active no-show, which was off-market status, or if they're withdrawn or under contract. So during the under contract period, they're not growing days on market. Does that make sense? And the nice thing is these slides will all be sent to you, so you don't need to sit there and try and worry about it. But they reset once the listing has been canceled, expired, or it's been sold. So that's how it works right now with days on market. Cumulative days on market. They increase when they're active or in backup status. They pause the same way if it's active no-show, if they're withdrawn or they're under contract. And then the cumulative days reset when the property either sells, there's a C of O, or it hasn't been listed for 90 days. Okay. Again, it's a little confusing because CDOM is usually going to be larger than your DOM unless they're the same. Oh, there we go. Simplified days on market. It'll increase again, active or backup status. It pauses the same way. And then it resets when the listing is sold, C of O, or if it is not for sale on the MLS for 30 days. So it went from 90 days to 30-day windows. So if a house has been off the market, when I say off the market, not listed for 30 days, it'll reset. Or if it's listed with a new brokerage or an office, it's a new listing with another broker. So, and I'm just going to pick on, I'll pick on my team just because there's 2 of me, Dean and David Chow. If Dean took a listing and it's been on the market for 60 days and we still haven't gotten it sold, I can't cancel the listing and then have my business partner, David Chow, list it and have the days on market reset. It won't do that. But if it goes to another brokerage, then it will reset. Does that kind of make sense? So you can't run it around the team, as fun as that might be, and do that because it's trying to stop that process. There are some people that will cancel their listing so that they can relist it, get a new number. It won't allow that in the system because, as again, that's playing the system. They want to show real days on market. Yes, Rob.
So it's going to be SDOM first of all.
Nope, it'll just be days on market. It'll be a DOM.
Okay, and
there's going to be one field.
Sounds like the main change is that
it
shows that it's been listed before.
Yeah.
And this kind of gets rid of that.
Nope, it'll still show those. So there's a table here. This is the one I really care about. Current days on market goes away. We're really going to be using CDOM for the new days on market, and listings will reset after 30 days instead of 90 days being on the market. So what we want to do is show what's really happening with it. CDOM or the days on market will start over again only if it's relisted with another brokerage, because then it is a new listing. And so you had new days on market. But if we try to, let's say we keep it in the family. So I have a listing, it's not working. So I hand it over to Dr. Christofferson, and I'm just teasing. But if I have Greg listed, the days on market is still going to continue, because even though it's in the brokerage, it's a different team even. They're saying, yeah, we want to show the real picture of what's going on with this listing. Does that make sense? And that's what we're doing, because you as agents want to know what's happening with the listing instead of like, I have to go look at the history to see what really happened. Because where someone did it, be careful about inappropriately listing properties. I've seen people, let's say there's a property that has 2 tax IDs. There's a house tax ID, and then there's the property around it, and they just list it as one listing. They'll say it includes 2 tax IDs. We had an agent try and do that. That's $1,000 fine, because you're mislisting a property, because I had the house ID, but it was on too long. So then I took the property ID and I relisted it and called it a house. Yeah, don't do that. Just saying. Yes, Greg.
So, okay, I have a listing right now, which is.
Go ahead.
I think I have a listing right now, which is basically being sold as a single parcel, 10 acres, but one of those acres is a different tax ID number. Am I okay with that?
You're
If I
totally
just say,
fine, because you would say this includes these tax ID numbers in this listing. That's not a problem. But if you canceled tax ID number 1 and then went to tax ID number 2
with a new listing,
as a new listing,
and the other
that's your
associated
problem.
with it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I got it.
So thou shalt not. Okay, any other questions? But Peter Christensen, CEO of UCAR, the Utah Central Association of Realtors, been here since 2015. I cannot believe it's been since 2015.
I know.
Dude. Anyway, before that, he was chief legal counsel at UAR. Peter knows stuff. And so that's kind of why we just said, go ahead and put the next slide if you would. What's going on, UCAR? So really, it's Peter, what's going on? And so open forum, you can share what you'd like, but I know that there's really nothing to talk about in the world of real estate.
Right.
All that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Peter, but let's give him a warm welcome.
Thanks, Dean. I saw Corey up there and I told him I hoped I was before him. All right. What? Oh, I can hold it. I can hold it. Makes you feel like Steve Jobs back in the day when he just, control his whole presentation. So if you guys have questions, Dean really didn't give me much to go on. He said, just come give us an update, Peter. So you'll get, things that are on my mind. But if you have questions,
get into the weeds.
Yeah. All right. I can get into the weeds. So a couple things interesting. I actually got a text this morning from Johnny, who I guess is at a Keller Williams event. And he was talking about market shift and strategies and planning. And I think we're in an interesting time where usually we see cycles, but I haven't talked to someone yet. And I'm 15 years with the Realtor organization. And I've definitely seen, I started in 2007, everything was crazy. You couldn't lose money in real estate to everyone lost money in real estate the next year. But it seems cyclical, but I don't know anyone who has seen a market like the past 2 years, right? People who've been in it a lot longer than I have are saying, I've never seen this iteration. So what's so interesting is it seems to be changing almost as rapidly as it came in, right? And so people don't know what to do. So some interesting, I get asked all the time, as you probably do, what is the market going to do? And I'm not an economist, so I look and say, well, this is what I see. But I feel, as probably a lot of people do, like something's got to give in the market. Are we going to see price reductions? Every economist I've talked to says, no, we're not going to. And I don't know. My gut says one thing, the experts are saying another. But I'll tell you something interesting that was said, I think it was last week in Chicago. Lawrence Yun, you guys know who that is, a national economist for the NAR. and a pretty smart guy. He does always now. He starts his presentations by saying, "I'm an economist, so everything I say is probably going to be wrong in a year or two." But he gave us some predictions. One thing I thought was really interesting is he said the chances of a mass value drop nationally are basically zero. I thought that was really interesting.
So that's what Ben Bernanke said in 2006 before the housing.
Right, right. So who knows? Who knows? But they don't usually come out that strong. But he said they're virtually zero. And what he's basing that off of is the differences in 07 in our market, in the lending, in the practices, and the inventory, mostly the inventory.
The problem is here we have quantitative easing. We have quantitative easing. We don't know what's going to happen. They started that in 2009, and quantitative easing only means printing more money. So by driving the rates low. So we don't really, there's no economist on earth I would believe in right now.
Right. It is interesting though, because we are seeing something interesting in the market, and that is that sales have dropped, right? But values have not. And that's kind of what they're looking at. But what does that mean for you? I loved a comment also by Lawrence Yun, and that was that agents get paid for transactions, not for value in the economy, not for number of listings. You get paid for transactions, and we are seeing those down right now. And so what does that mean for your future? I don't know. We are at the end of our dues billing period as an association, and we do our best to forecast that a year in advance with our budgets. And so we budgeted for 3,300 members of UCAR to renew. We got up to a little above 3,500. We always see a little drop in at dues renewal, a couple hundred usually drop. And we are today at about 3,100 renewals, and we have a couple weeks left before the final cutoff. So we'll see how many join if we hit that number. But just kind of interesting that we have seen a bit of slow. What anecdotally, we'll run some numbers when we're done, but some of the drops that I know of are agents that have been in the business for 30 years. And that's where I'm seeing most of our surprising drops of, I've been in this market's too crazy for me. The technology, I don't want to do it. Things have changed too much. I don't want to invest in figuring this out at this point in my career. And so I'm seeing some names, Dean might know, Don Housekeeper and others like that are saying, yeah, I don't think I'm going to renew. I think I'm done. And so that's kind of interesting. It wasn't what I expected. I expected more of the agents who joined in the past 2 years and think that that's how real estate is all the time. And now they're having to work a little harder and saying, this isn't the business for me. But that's not, we'll see. We'll run some numbers and get back to you. Some interesting stats. 19 states so far in the United States have more jobs today than they did in March of 2020 when the pandemic hit. And Utah is the top. 6% more jobs in Utah today than there were pre-pandemic, right as the pandemic was hitting. And it's interesting, for a while, there were 2 states with positive job growth, and that was Idaho and Utah. And everyone else was in negative. But yeah, just says something about, again, our economy. We're hearing about this over and over, even through the recession. The strength of Utah's economy is still pretty hot. Okay. So some interesting things going on. There's a really interesting case going through the Utah court system about a text binding parties to a transaction. So we all know the statute of frauds says certain contracts have to be in writing. Real estate are one of those. And the country has been wrestling for a decade or so with whether or not an email or a text constitutes has enough of the elements to make a digital signature. And we obviously have platforms. There's actually a uniform law that covers digital signatures and when that can bind a party. And obviously the platforms that use those cover those, but and the courts have been split. So Massachusetts, I believe they held parties to an email being considered enough to be a signature and bind the parties. Arizona has wrestled with it. And I think they remanded it, kind of said, no, we need more info to the lower courts. So it's hit Utah. I used to joke in classes about, do you want to be the test case? Well, somebody now is the test case in Utah. So hopefully they didn't take my class and not follow my advice. Dean.
Peter, in this case, though, I believe the seller was the realtor was also the seller in this case.
Right.
And so that it just does muddy it a bit.
Yeah, funny facts.
But wouldn't that be terrible if a text message is enough to bind a buyer or a seller?
Right.
In a
It changes
transaction?
things, right? So the advice is until that gets settled, and I think the UAR is actually going to chime in, write an amicus brief and give their opinion on it as this kind of goes forward. But as good practice is to be careful, be very careful what you put in writing and how you say it, that you're not definitive. You're not saying, yes, my seller will accept those terms. You're saying, that looks great. Let me get back to my seller. Don't get a little too cavalier with anything you put in writing, because more and more of the courts are pushing towards that being binding in some way, and we'll see where it lands. I think there's a great line, a differentiator, but courts may not see it that way. So be careful.
Peter, help me with this. I used to work for a company where the in-house attorney would counsel people that interact with customers.
Mhm.
I can't remember the legal term, but what he would say is, do not, in your messaging to them, admit fault. So, for example, if we didn't show up on time to do this, don't go on and apologize that we dropped the ball and we did this, because he said, you're giving admissions to something that should we get sued for, I'm going to have to go back. And a lot of this stuff, there's a reason we were late. There was this, did he call them admissions? There was something legally. So when I think about dealing with clients, sometimes we have a history to apologize, but if we were going to get called in to justify, so that's what I was asking you about. Can you
Yeah.
maybe clear that up a little bit?
Well,
or
just look at it this way. I mean, we live in an attorney's dream world, right? You're documenting everything. And so as an attorney goes to build a case, we've got it all in black and white, and you've provided it for us. So I had a conversation the other day, and it was based off of a text chain. And surprise, surprise, memories were different of the conversation. And I said, wait, that's not what you said. And the person said, no, I think that is. And I said, well, we've got it in black and white. I was able to pull it up and show exactly what the person said. So there's a lot more credibility to written evidence, because you're not relying on, do you remember saying this? Is that the feeling? Was that what you meant by that? Instead, you're saying, here's exactly what was said on that day. Now you've got to try to explain context. You've got to try to explain away the words, rather than saying, that's not how I recall that conversation going. Because I can literally recall it onto my screen and show you word for word what was actually said. And so, heaven forbid you all have to start thinking like attorneys. That's not a fun world to live in, but just be smart about it, and realize everything you're texting, everything you're emailing is now a written form of evidence, and you can't pull it back, right? So even if you erase it on your devices, it's still on their devices, and it's still out there. So good. Admitting fault. giving reasons why a seller or buyer is doing something, it's super tempting. And, you know, sometimes you can get too cryptic where you don't sound human, but there's a fine balance between kind of going on an expose about why we're making this decision and just getting to the facts of, no, my seller won't entertain that. Don't give a big explanation of why unless you're prepared for that to be now used, right? That information is now given. And so it's like cancellations. Just never give a reason why, because you give the reason why, now it can be challenged. Now they can question it. Now they can show how maybe it was contradictory to what you said prior to that. So this is a big contrast from Corey. I should have people race around the room again, right? This is too sobering. I'm bringing you all down. No, so yeah, but dude, be smart about that information and whatever you write down and what your clients write down. It's one of the reasons we don't love when clients start texting directly to the other parties, right? Because they're not thinking like we are. They're not being careful about what they're saying. They're letting their emotions about the transaction dictate their word usage. And I mean, that's what lawyers do, right? We pick apart word usage. We find the meaning in the words of what was actually said. And so, yeah, do be careful. And as far as not binding clients, just never, in my mind, you're never definitive. I'll get back to you. That sounds great. I think my sellers will like that. That sounds like they'll be interested in this. You use softening words that are saying, this is not resolved yet. I'll get back to you when it's resolved from my client.
Yeah, a lot of times I hear folks say, my seller won't go for that. And I will stop and say, so from when I propose something to you're just saying that you've already spoken with your seller. And so you want to make sure we're really clear on our communications that I encourage other people to
based
represent
on
their
prior
client.
conversations, they may not like that term. Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, but that'll be kind of fun to see what the Utah courts land on with. We're going to have to change our entire world and stop texting people. I think it was just district court, so I think it's just being appealed now. Okay. A little politics. We'll see what's going on. So, boy, we've seen a record number of property tax increase requests. So we've got this really cool law in Utah called Truth in Taxation. And it's a big fat pain for any city that wants to raise taxes because they have to send out postcards and send out notices, and everyone knows they're trying to raise property taxes. And that was a bill that UAR heavily supported back in the day because we wanted to make it painful for cities to raise taxes. However, we were kind of ready as a government affairs committee to maybe start, we were going to publish a bunch of information and encourage you all to go with pitchforks. And I got word from some of our state lobbyists saying, cool it on this one. Okay. We don't like property tax increases. And what they found historically, and this makes a ton of sense, is we want cities to use property tax as their primary taxation method because it's super transparent, it's super evenly distributed, and I hate the word fair, but fair type of taxation. Fair is what you pay to ride the bus. That's what I tell my kids. But cities, what they're feeling the pinch, they're feeling the inflationary pinch like everyone else. It's costing them more to operate. It's costing them more with employees, with gas, with everything they do. And so they're saying, well, we need to offset this. Now, normally in a perfect world, it would be balanced by sales tax revenue. Cost of goods is going up, more tax revenue for the cities. However, do we shop at the store or do we shop on our phone? I shop on the phone 90% of the time, right? Unless I have to go to a store or I need it within the next hour, because even sometimes Amazon can get it to me later that day, the next morning. So more and more cities are saying we're not having this offset, this inflation the inflationary costs offset by, sorry, I keep moving from your camera. We're having it offset by tax revenue, sales tax revenue. So we need to find it somewhere else. And cities are great at finding it somewhere else. And so what they'll do is fees. They'll raise impact fees. They'll raise licensing fees, service fees. And those don't go through the truth in taxation. They're a tax for all intents and purposes, but they're couched as a fee. Therefore, they don't have to be as transparent. It's handled in a meeting somewhere that nobody's paying attention to. And we would much rather have them have to go through the painful process of bringing it to the citizens and sending out postcards. And so we still want them to be accountable, and I want you to pay attention in your own cities. What are they doing? And going and asking the tough question of, do we need, I get it, everything's costing you more, but where can we cut instead of just raise taxes to cover more expenses? And have some tough conversations with that. But I was reminded, we are not fundamentally opposed to property taxes, just unnecessarily high property taxes. So that's an interesting thing that's going on all over the state. And another one, so we had an interesting ordinance down in Moab. Now, if you've been to Moab, Moab's awesome. They're so geographically locked, right? And the whole world has discovered them over the past 10 years. And have you ever looked at the motel? They don't even have a proper hotel. Motel pricing down there. You know, to stay at the Holiday Inn in Moab over a weekend will cost you more per night than staying in Maui at a resort. And I'm not joking, because that happened in 1 year and I was shocked. And if you go from Thursday to Friday, the rates sometimes double. So you're paying $480 a night to stay in a Holiday Inn in Moab. Is it a super nice Holiday Inn? No, it's a pretty regular Holiday Inn, right? But it's supply and demand. So they have forever had the problem of workforce housing. You know, how do we pay a technician at a bike shop enough to live in Moab? And they don't have, it's like Park City, they can pull from Salt Lake. They can pull from Camas. They can pull from surrounding areas. What do you have in Moab? Green River. Yeah, Green River is still like 40 minutes away, right? Monticello's almost an hour away, and there's like 18 people that live there. So they don't have access. And so they're recognizing we got a huge problem. So yeah, a big problem. They started thinking outside of the box. And they wanted to deed restrict new developments to where 40 something is the most random number. It was like 43.5% of the project had to be deed restricted for local workers. And very, very problematic because you're not going to get the developments to pencil. And it's interesting because the discussion that we engaged with them was, you're artificially lowering value. And they said, no, we're not. We're not telling you how much you can sell it for. We're telling you to whom you can sell it, right? And we said, yeah, but if the median income, which was in Moab at the time we pulled the numbers, is $70,000, that does not come close to covering the median price of housing in the area. So you are making those developers sell it at an artificially low price. And so we worked with them with parachute provisions and cut the number down and concessions to the builders to try to make it pencil. But our worry is more cities are going to believe they fit in the same mold as Moab and are going to try and come up with this type of artificial devaluing of property. And the big issue, what we're going to monitor, is whether or not Moab sees the development they need, right? Because if you make it impossible for a developer to make the projects pencil, they just won't build there. And then you're not getting the very housing you want for the people you want it for. So we'll see if that happens. That's what we've warned them about. And so the state, we got the big players involved in that conversation. So the Home Builders Association, the UAR, And we'll see this legislative session, what type of protections the state's going to start putting in place to not let cities go crazy. We'll see some stuff with the ADU stuff, because there are some cities just completely not following it, right? Just absolutely not following the law.
Define ADU. for
Oh,
most of
sorry.
them.
Accessory dwelling units. We had an awesome law passed. I think it's awesome. A year or two ago, and HB 82, I think it was. You know, it was a controversial one if I remember the number. And it basically forced cities to legalize accessory dwelling units. So that's within the footprint of your house, that apartment in your basement, right? And they said you have to allow them in a certain percentage of your city. And the big fight came. So step further, I'll use Orem. We're in Orem, and I actually live in Orem, and grew up in Orem. So Orem, and Orem's had good times and bad times with their city, with their municipality. And so Orem, you could have an ADU. For a while they stopped it, and then they said everyone who wants to sign up can make them legal, because everyone knows the truth is if there's the demand, they're there whether they're legal or not. And so better to regulate them and make it reasonable. But what they did is said, great, you can have one of these, but it's going to cost you $35,000. Like, it's safe for your kids to live there right now. No problem. You passed all the checks that you needed to for safety. But now that you're going to put a renter in there, now we need double walls. We need separate this and that and ductwork and this and that. So the rooms where your kids were living were fine. But if you put a renter in there, $35,000 of upgrades to make it a legal ADU. So they were regulating it out, but saying, no, they're legal in Orem. And this law came and said, you can't do that anymore. They gave them like 3 or 4 simple safety things that they could require: one off-site parking spot, and said, you got to make them legal. And the fight was in college towns, and Provo led that fight and got an exemption that was basically 2/3 of your city could in college towns. So Orem, Logan, Salt Lake, Provo were basically the only towns that qualified for that, cities that qualified. You could exempt it in 2/3 of the city. And so went to a Provo city council meeting right after that, where they were discussing how they were going to rezone it to be compliant. And they picked industrial zones, multifamily zones where it did not even apply to the stock, the housing stock there, and said, those are our legal ADU zones, and literally said over the pulpit, so I think those zones will have the least amount of impact on us, right? So not in the heart of it, of creating an affordable housing product or option for people. And so we'll see, there'll probably be some movement at the state on that, on hammering that down even more.
Provo actually said they wanted 4 off-street parking.
Yeah, they
They wanted a 4 off-street parking, and in Orem, they're actually charging like a $4,000 fee just to convert it over to an ADU.
Yeah. And it's that kind of stuff that I think the legislature is going to crack down on more, because cities are really good. They're really good at exposing loopholes and finding ways to get around it. But yeah. Dean, you just got to tell me when I'm done. All right. My parting shot. Be careful. We've gotten to a frenzy for a while. We're having to slow down a little bit and think about things a little more. Earnest money. We're seeing the first fruits of kind of careless earnest money advice. So non-refundable earnest money, we're starting to see some pushback, some buyers that lost their lunch on that. Sounded like a really good idea 6 months ago, got me in the house. Now I can't afford it, pull out. I just lost 50 grand. I heard one a couple of weeks ago in Utah County, $100,000 of earnest money. And it was like a $2.3 million home. So it was a big home, but that's a lot of earnest money. And the seller's walking away and having to match it because they're breaching the contract. So Be smart and give good advice. I think right now more than ever, we need to give our buyers and sellers advice that covers multiple market conditions, right? We got so myopic for a minute in the frenzy that it bit everyone in this rapid transition. No one saw it changing that quickly. But I think we got to think that way of if it's if it's more of a shift to, I still think we're in a seller's market, but if it's a shift to more of a neutral or even buyer's market, what advice could protect a buyer or seller in that case? What advice would protect them if it swings further? I heard some rumors rates might drop next year to 3.5%. I don't know how they can predict that, so I wouldn't put a lot of salt into that. But if they do, and we go back into builders building again, and we see more a frenzied market again, how can we protect them in all types of market scenarios?
Wow, everybody, thank you so much. Peter, we just appreciate your time, and everybody, thank you for being here. And thank you, Elevate Home Warranty, for lunch. Go eat.